Hey there! Welcome back to another review, this time of the 1996 comedy Big Bully. Now, I checked this film out because I've been in kind of a high school bully movie, where phase kind of where you have like people like in 3 O'Clock High, for instance, which is behind me, which you'll probably see the review for that before this gets posted. But anyway, I just kind of did a little mini marathon of similar films, and this is one that came up in my head, and I remember this being awful the first time I saw it. I even think I mentioned it as one of the worst films I saw when I did like a little podcast with my friends Matt and Effrey a while back. And I gotta be honest, after watching this again, I don't think it's that bad. I thought it was okay. I thought it wasn't as bad as its reputation suggests. I've seen much worse films with similar subject material. It was just a harmless, little, quaint little film that, admittedly, there are some issues, and I think it could have been actually a genuine classic if it had, for instance, it was a little bit more consistent with its tone because there's some really great bits of black humor in it that remind me of something that you might see in The Cable Guy. And if the film was more like that, then maybe it would be a film that I would definitely recommend to people. But as it is, it's there. It's all right. It's okay. It was entertaining. It wasn't really that boring to me. It just isn't really a film that is particularly memorable or a movie that is really that funny. So as a comedy, it's not really that funny. As a drama, it definitely isn't very good. But it just, I had some fun with it, with the acting, with the performances by Rick Moranis and Tom Arnold. I thought the direction by Steve Miner was actually really good. I thought it was rather fantastic and really added a whole nother dynamic and element to the film that usually isn't there with this type of movie. So the film was released in 1996, did nothing in the box office. It was a huge flop. It made $2 million on a $15 million budget when it came out in January of 96. It has a 0% in Rotten Tomatoes, which I'm sorry, it's not that bad. This movie is not a 0% bad. There, I've seen much, much, much worse films than Big Bully that had higher ratings than Big Bully did. For instance, Fist Fight or Fist Fucked, that has a higher rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So the film's directed by Steve Miner, who you might be familiar with because Steve Miner is well known for directing things like Halloween H2O, Warlock, Friday the 13th Part 2, and 3, House. So, he's not really as well known for directing things like this, but he dipped his foot in the water. I mean, he did a film before this called Forever Young, My Father the Hero. So he was working on trying to step out of his comfort zone, so to speak. And actually, I think this is a pretty successful dip into unfamiliar waters, so to speak, for Steve Miner. I said Steve Martin. Yeah, Steve Martin directed this. Uh, the film features a screenplay by Mark Steven Johnson, and he's actually directed a few films. He was the director of Daredevil with not Jack. There's nobody named Jack. I was looking at Jack Frost because he also helped write that. Daredevil with Ben Affleck. He also directed Ghost Rider. So, and he's done a few other things that aren't really much to write home about. He also helped, before Big Bully, though, he helped write Grumpy Old Men and Grumpier Old Men. And those are some really great films, if you ask me. Actually, he wrote both of them. So he had a pretty good string of really hilarious comedies before he wrote this. And those films kind of had a little bit more adult humor in them. So that's why I was wondering whether or not this script was originally meant to be a PG-13 film or an R rating, but then the studio came in, and Warner Brothers, and decided, no, we don't want that. We want it to appeal to kids, since there's kids in it, there's a teenager in it, and so on. And well, it didn't work. Whatever Warner Brothers decided to do didn't work. Now, I could be wrong, but I mean, this is a rated PG film, and the word pussy is used. There's other adult innuendos, there's other adult stuff and adult humor that kids wouldn't get. So it's kind of, and then you have the whole sort of dark humor and sadistic stuff, like Tom Arnold's character, when he was a kid, got sent away to this reformatory school, which is essentially a reformatory school for criminals, for kid criminals, and a lot of them were like psychopaths and serial killers. So that kind of stuff is really dark for a kids film. Features a cast that's comprised of Rick Moranis as David Leary. This is one of the last films he did before he semi-retired, before his semi-retirement. The last film he actually did as an actor was Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves, and I think that was a TV movie. This was the last film he did that actually had a theatrical release. Rick is fine here. He's likable. I like his character. Rick always did a great job playing this type of role, this kind of nerdy guy. It's this type of character you don't see as a lead in films nowadays, ever. This type of just nerdy, regular guy. He's a regular guy, and he's not particularly muscular. He's not particularly good looking. He's a normal, average, everyday guy, and I like that. That's really refreshing to see that type of thing. And Rick didn't really get the chance to really be a lead in a lot of films, so it was nice to see him as the lead in this movie. Tom Arnold is his co-star as Roscoe Fang Bigger, his childhood bully all grown up, coming back to torment him again. Uh, this might be the best performance I've seen from Tom Arnold. There's actually some nice subtle nuances to his performance in this that I think are very overlooked. Uh, the transition from this really beaten down, shy, reserved, older Fang to this full of energy and back to being his sadistic old self, Fang, as soon as Rick Moranis' character comes back home, it is actually a really fun dynamic. And the film actually does a good job making you actually sympathize with Tom Arnold's character, which is really difficult to do. Julianne Phillips plays Victoria Tucker, who is David's crush. He had a crush on her ever since she was a kid. You also have Carol Kane. She plays Fang's wife, Faith. A little bit role, but Carol Kane, she always adds this sort of weird. She adds some weird touch to every film that she's in that I do appreciate. It's another type of actress you don't see in a lot of films nowadays. And so when I see her in any film, I really do enjoy her performance usually. She always plays these quirky, weird characters, and this is definitely another one of those characters. Jeffrey Tambor is in this as Art Lundstrom, this neighbor of Rick Moranis' character, who has some genuinely funny lines. There's more bits of dark humor with this character that was pretty funny. It's like, you're the one that killed him. Uh, uh, Curtis Armstrong, Booger, he's in this as Clark. He's one of these guys who works at the school as a teacher. He thinks Rick Moranis' character is on crack. He's in it for a bit. Is in it, not in it that much, but I had some fun with this character. You also have Don Knotts, who plays the principal of the school. And you have a couple other actors. I mean, you have Blake Bashoff, who plays Ben Leary. He was in Bushwhacked, I think a year or two before this. And I didn't mind him in that. And I actually don't mind Bushwhacked either. I'm one of the few people who actually doesn't mind the film. I thought it was okay. Just like I felt this film is kind of the same sort of thing. That both of these movies both were just entertaining. They were time wasters for me. Uh, they were inoffensive. There wasn't anything about it, either of these, that really pissed me off or made me upset. Was there a lot of generic stuff in this? Yeah, but it didn't make it bad. And you also have a couple actors from Little Giants, which Rick Moranis was also in. In fact, the actor who played the young character, the young Rick Moranis character from Little Giants, Justin John Ross, he plays young David in this movie, in the prologue in the beginning of the film. You also have Michael Zwiener, who plays a young Roscoe, Fang, and he was also in Little Giants. So there's kind of like a little sort of Little Giants reunion here with a couple of the actors in the beginning of the film. And I thought that was kind of fun to see because I'm a big fan of Little Giants. So the movie basically opens up with this prologue, which is that's where it gets really. It does feel pretty generic here in the prologue because it's not really doing anything that hasn't been done before. It takes place in, I believe, in the 60s, uh, or the 1969 or 1970. Growing up in Hastings, Minnesota, young David Leary, he's Justin John Ross. He's bullied by Roscoe Bigger, nicknamed Fang because of his pointed tooth. And so there's this sort of stuff where there's narration by Rick Moranis over these flashback scenes of David's childhood, and it did a good job establishing how big of a bully Fang was to David. And David finds out he's going to move. His parents are going to move to Oakland, and unlike most instances, he's excited. He's like, "Yeah, we're moving. Yeah, I'm gonna go run in my room and I'm gonna pack things up real quick because I can't wait to move away from this shitty town and move away from this bully." And so he decides to make like one last hurrah type thing. He decides to leave with a bang, and he rats out Fang for stealing a moon rock, and Fang is arrested. And then it flashes forward 26 years later. David is divorced. He's raising his troubled teenage son Ben all by himself. He's a writer. There's a fun scene where he's at a book signing at a bookstore, and all these people are coming into the bookstore and they're asking him. They're thinking he works there, so they're like, "Do you know where the new Stephen King book is?" And eventually, and he's trying to tell them about what his book is, and nobody's interested. This stoner guy comes in, and it's a fun scene where Rick Moranis starts. He pretty much plays along, and he lies about what his book is about and says, what's my book about? Oh, it's about this husband who kills his wife and he chops her up into little pieces and he buries her in this cemetery. So it's like Pet Cemetery, huh? Yeah, yeah, it's a lot like that. And then so the stoner guy is like, "Oh, dude, yeah, totally." It's like, would you like me to sign the book? It's like, "Yeah, sign it." So that was fun. I thought it was pretty nice little. It was nice to see Rick Moranis play that type of role. Um, so he's not having much success selling these books. So he actually gets a offer from his old high school. His not necessarily I think it's his old school, not high school. I think it's like a elementary school or junior high, middle school, and they offer him a job teaching creative writing for the semester. He moves back home, back to Hastings, Minnesota, gets a place there. There's another fun scene before I mention that kind of stuff that I enjoyed, where David goes to pick up his son Ben, and his son Ben is hanging out with these kind of rough and tumble types, and he's trying to get him to stay away from these type of kids, these troubled kids, and Ben is like all upset at his dad. Look, Dad, they're my friends. It's like, those aren't your friends, Ben. Those are the next criminals on America's Most Wanted. And since I'm a huge fan of that show, and I grew up watching that show with my dad, That definitely did get a chuckle out of me. So I mean, there were more scenes and lines and moments in this that made me laugh than there were in something like Fist Fight. So I mean, there's that. So he moves back in to Hastings, Minnesota. He meets his neighbors Art and Betty Lundstrom. Art is played by Jeffrey Tambor, and then the type of neighbors that are always trying to be helpful, but to the point where it's just annoying. And if you've ever actually had those type of people who are, oh hey, here's a healthy tip for you. Make sure you do this and that. Hey, if you're gonna do this, make sure you do that. It's just, if you've ever been in that type of situation, this is pretty funny because it's definitely relatable. So he also begins rekindling a relationship with his old crush, Victoria. And I really do like the chemistry these two have between Rick and Julianne Phillips. So you had Rick Moranis and Julianne Phillips. I thought they worked well with one another. They had a spark, and I wish they were on screen more. There's a scene that happens, and Rick Moranis kind of embarrasses himself in front of her, and then that whole storyline with her is just dropped, and then it never goes back to it until like before the movie is about to end. So I just thought there was a little bit missing there, and they definitely could have done more with those two characters. So he encounters the school librarian who is still waiting for David to return his green eggs and ham book to the library, and it's like hundreds of days overdue. Uh, and then his son actually starts bullying. His son starts bullying a kid named Kirby, and David ends up meeting the boy's father, Ross, who's Fang, who are both called into the office of Principal Kokler. And following a fire drill, David meets with his old friend Ulf, who's a firefighter. And his friend Ulf, when he was a kid, he was really into burning things and lighting shit on fire. And even as a firefighter, he's a pyromaniac. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic, too. That's a nice touch. Uh, and that's kind of dangerous, honestly, to have a firefighter who's a pyromaniac. But it's a comedy, so I guess I can. I just thought it was an interesting touch, and I let it slide. He meets with his friends Ulf, Alan, and Jerry at a bar. David learns that after Ross got out of juvie hall, his parents skipped town and that led to him growing up in an orphanage. And so, of course, Rick Moranis feels bad because he's like, well, I didn't want that to happen. I mean, that's awful. But he's still, but he hasn't really, he's terrified of Ross, though. Because he knows, okay, this is my bully. And so there's a great scene where he sees him and he realizes that it's Fang. Because he sees his fang, that he sees his sharp tooth. And I love the way Steve Miner directed this sequence. And it's all in this sort of tilted, off-kilter camera work. And he has this, he shows Rick Moranis' character, David has this thing on his neck. And it's like his vein, and it's pulsating really quickly. And it's a very strange choice, but I thought it was a very inspired choice to show how freaked out Rick Moranis was when he realized, oh my God, the bully is back. He's in the school. He works here as the woodshop teacher. So once Ross realizes that David, he's there, he starts going back in his old routine of bullying him to make himself feel better. Ross drops his mild-mannered pushover attitude, begins taking charge in his classroom and his home. David's son begins bullying Ross's son, but after a discussion, they actually become friends, which is a nice dynamic as well. Ross begins to intimidate until David becomes paranoid. He freaks out another teacher, Clark, who thinks he's on crack. David brings Ross's actions to Principal Kokler. And of course, he's saying, he's bullying me. He's picking on me, sir. Really? One of the teachers is picking on you. And so, of course, nothing really is done about it. David is told by Principal Kokler that Ross has been a teacher longer than David has. And he states that he'd gotten some complaints from Clark about David, and if David can't straighten up his act, he'll get fired. and a substitute will replace him. So they meet up later that night, and before that, that's the whole scene at a dance where Rick Moranis and Julianne Phillips are having a nice little moment, but Tom Arnold comes in and ruins it, and Rick Moranis' paranoia ends up backfiring because he saw that Ross was there in front of the punch, so we thought he did something to it, understandably so, and of course you find out later that he did, but he pretty much embarrasses himself by taking the cup out of Julianne Phillips' his hand and spills it on her, and that causes a fallout between the two. And so after that, though, then there's a whole sort of thing where it escalates inside of the school. They meet at the old seesaw. Ross reaffirms that David has never stood up for himself, at which point David admits snitching to get Ross put into juvie hall and says that he felt good about it. They have a really fun game of cat and mouse in the school after hours. Tom Arnold shooting at him with a nail gun. Just some nice set pieces here. Rick Moranis is trying to get away from him on the rope that's in the gym, and Ross lights it on fire. This leads to Rick escaping out through the skylight on the roof, and then he goes back to this cave where he remembered he used to hide when he was a kid away from Fang. And he actually goes past the point he said he would never go past, and this red rock, and it leads out to this actually pretty crazy sequence where they're on a waterfall, on this sort of bridge over a waterfall, and Rick Moranis, his character David, finally grows some balls and has a confrontation. Says, you're never what is going on here? Why, I'm sick and tired of this. And of course, Tom Arnold is like, well, I thought we were friends, because this whole sort of thing, Ross and David have this confrontation, and Ross is like, you were my friend and you betrayed me, and David's like, you thought we were friends? You beat me up. You humiliated me. I'm 35 years old and I still have nightmares about the 4th grade. That's not what friends do for each other. A friend is supposed to make you feel good about yourself. And then Ross is like, really? Then you're the best friend I ever had. Because actually, it did make him feel better about himself. Not in the right way, but they get in this confrontation. David fights him. He hits him with a piece of driftwood. It causes Ross to fall into the waterfall, into the river. Of course, now he's freaked out that he killed him. And so he tries to turn himself into the police, but the cops are out. They're not there. And Ulf drives David to his home. And Ulf goes to try to find Ross's body. He has a talk with Art, which I thought was pretty funny, where it's a talk with Jeffrey Tambor's character. And he has this talk with him. And he's like, I remember and he has a talk about, I killed him. I killed somebody. And Art's like, I remember the first time I tried to kill my Betty. He's like, what? Let me finish. You tried to kill Betty? Because this whole sort of thing, because before it's like he read his mind. Before Rick Moranis ever even said anything, Art was there and he was like, you killed the shop teacher. How did you know? And so then it turns into this conversation about Art remembering the first time he tried to kill his wife. And first David's like, oh, no, this is really messed up. And he's like, you tried to kill Betty? And then Art's like, oh, I see, Mr. High and Mighty. Hey, I didn't kill the shop teacher. Who killed the shop teacher? You killed the shop teacher. You killed him. So that's what I'm talking about, that kind of black humor. I really would have liked to have seen more of that. Another instance of that is before Ross starts shooting at Rick Moranis with a nail gun. He tells him about the story about the reformatory school he went to, where he went to all these crazy kids. And he's talking about, and when those junior psychos asked me what I was in there for, I had to tell them I was there because I stole a freaking rock. He shoots the nail gun at him. So, I mean, there's some, that kind of stuff. Junior Psychos. There's this show that they're watching on TV called Connie, which is a nice little parody of these absurd talk shows at the time. There's one where they're watching about, and it's about these people that are in love with their pets. So, I mean, there's some potential here for a really classic film, and I liked the concept a lot of the bullied kid growing up, going back to the middle school, the House of Horrors, and then having to deal with his bully again. And dealing with all these hijinks and these shenanigans, and he's having to deal with being bullied as an adult. I thought that was a different sort of thing. You really don't see that much, at least not what I remember. I don't remember a lot of films that have this particular type of storyline. So anyway, eventually, of course, Ross is still alive. Ross is still alive. He didn't die. They start getting in a fight. There's a fun scene where they end up going in the bathroom, and there's a confrontation. And David grabs a hairdryer and he's pointing it at Ross, and Tom Arnold is like, "What? What are you gonna do? Style my hair?" So so that was a pretty fun line too. And eventually, everything gets worked out because the two kids come in and they say, "Can you guys just kiss and make? Can you guys just make up? Can you guys just be friends? I mean, we did that. We're kids." So they end up making up. They squash the beef. Ross reveals he stole the moon rock because he wanted to be an astronaut. It was also shown that during the recent fight, Ross's fang was chipped, so they finally patched things up. The teaching job is over. David packs up again. He's getting ready to move back to New York. He has Victoria return green eggs and ham to the school library for him. Ross arrives, and as a goodbye present for David, he gives him an Evel Knievel action figure identical to the one that David had as a child before Ross threw it into a river. And that was the kind of moment, too, the moment of truth for David, is when he was holding on, hanging on for his life a little bit on this bridge that's hanging over the waterfall. He got up and he realized, oh, there's the Evel Knievel doll that I used to have, and that gave him the courage to stand up for himself. And he gets a new one. David tells him to visit whenever, and then the family leaves. Ross then hooks up his mobile home to his truck, and he follows David, telling his family that they've been invited to come to New York, which is setting up for a sequel that never happened because the movie was a bomb. Now, yeah, it's not necessarily the greatest film out there. Like I said, it's a time waster. It's all right. There's some fun lines of dialogue here and there. The idea is fun. I thought the performances by Rick Moranis and Tom Arnold were quite good for what they were asked to do. Steve Miner's direction, since he's a horror film director, he was able to add that sort of horror directing to this film. So there are certain scenes with Tom Arnold that are actually pretty intimidating and kind of scary. So I got to give him big kudos for that. And I mean, it was a $15 million film, and the budget is on the screen, especially in the sequences on the waterfall. And so there's some fun set pieces, and yeah, I mean, would I say it's underrated? No, but I don't think it's that bad of a film. I'd say it's not as bad as its reputation suggests it is. And if you like Rick Moranis and you can tolerate Tom Arnold, I definitely say, hey, check it out, I guess. I mean, I can't really say, wow, I really recommend this one, because at best it's average. But I mean, average is better than being a total piece of shit. And I thought it was just going to be a total piece of shit. It was average. It was okay. It was watchable, and it was fairly entertaining. So it's not something I'd watch over and over again or something I'd watch again anytime soon. But if I saw it on DVD for cheap, sure, I'd pick it up because, I can have some fun with it. And, that's good. I mean, That's more than I ever thought could ever be possible for this movie. The score by David Newman, it's the typical sort of score for this type of movie. It's nothing special. Uh, and you have some cinematography by Darren Okada and the editing by Marshall Harvey. It's there and so on. I mean, these aren't the type of films that you look for great cinematography. It's, you know, that's not the type of movie for it. But Steve Miner, though, I thought his direction was great. It had a lot of energy. It kind of reminded me of 3 O'Clock High in some ways, in the way that he moved the camera around, which was nice to see. And yeah, I mean, that's a big bully. I don't know what else to say about the film, except if I was to rate out of 5 stars. I give it 3 out of 5 stars. I know it's a longer review than anybody has probably ever done for this film, but, there were some things that I wanted to talk about it and wanted to, just say, hey, it's not that bad. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always, I will see you guys later. See ya.